One of the most frustrating things about being a gaming content creator has to be the fact that a lot of times certain games will end up passing you by. And this is not because you did not enjoy those games, it is because they did not achieve a certain level of success in your avenue of choice, whether that is YouTube or Twitch or whatever. And eventually you end up never really picking that game up again. And you just kind of leave it by the wayside as a really fond memory that you have of the times that you played that game, but you never really saw it to conclusion. I understand. I'm not really saying this as a complaint because ultimately, what do? I play video games and I create video games about them. There's really not that much reason to complain other than whenever YouTube kind of dicks you over, which actually happens quite often. But ultimately, the reason I am telling you guys this is to illustrate a point and hopefully to help you understand why I did what I did with God of War, which was essentially I stopped live streaming it. I stopped really creating content around it because I wanted to focus around playing it so that I would actually have the full experience of God of War. And let me tell you, I don't regret what I did one bit because goddamn, that was some of the most fun that I've had in quite some time when it comes to video games, okay? God of War is a friggin' fantastic video game, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about it today. Now, very important things. You guys will probably see like a symbol somewhere around here. That means that if the symbol is in this side, there are currently no spoilers whatsoever being discussed, just in case you guys want to jump forward in the video and see other different things. But if you see the symbol on this side, it probably means that we're about to enter spoiler area. So you will have naturally a warning because you guys know that I'm pretty sensitive about spoilers and stuff like that. So let's get into it. And I'm going to tell you guys about my experience right now, completely spoiler free, before we actually get to some of the spoiler stuff that I want to talk about. So first things first, I mean, visuals and sounds, I've already praised the game quite a bit. I just want to know, in case you guys haven't seen the other videos that I did about God of War, this is hands down the best looking game on PlayStation 4 right now, in my opinion. Whether that is in 1080p with super sampling, 1080p regular, or 4K. It's just, to me, the best looking game that I've seen. Fantastic animation, fantastic audio, and the soundtrack is actually something that I've started enjoying the more I played the game. Because at the start, you kind of feel that the soundtrack is very undertone. But as you play more and more, you start to notice the little nuances of the soundtrack, when and where it kicks in, begins to make a lot more sense, and I began enjoying it much, much more. Then the other thing is story. Now that I've actually played through the entire story, I can say that I've really, really enjoyed the story of the game, like the whole journey of everything that takes place from beginning to end. I've appreciated pretty much every story beat, which was surprising because usually there will be a couple of things that I will like to point out, like, oh, this particular thing I didn't really care for that much, but most of the story, at least I can't really remember anything right now that I was just like, oh, dude, I hated this specific thing about it. There wasn't really anything. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of story beats that when we actually get to the spoiler bit of this particular video, there are a couple of story beats that really, really, like, they hit really close to home. I've mentioned this in the past. In this video, I'm going to get into greater detail further down the line. Now, the other thing is naturally the character development, which I think that with Kratos having his son around him the whole time, I think a lot of people might have thought, okay, so does that mechanic pan out? Does it not work all that well? Because, you know, sometimes when you have two characters and one of the characters is, you know, a smaller kid or something, sometimes you can have a game kind of just devolve into a big escort quest. Never really felt that way with Atreus at all. As a matter of fact, if anything, it was the exact opposite. There will be times where Atreus is not there with you, and you will be like, oh my God, this, if only Atreus was here. You see, it actually makes you feel the other way around. Like, oh, I need Atreus here because of this. He is extremely useful, and not just from a gameplay perspective, but also from like a storytelling perspective, like the struggles that the characters go through and kind of how it shapes their development as characters in this video game is just friggin' fantastic. Now, the other thing that I wanted to bring up a little bit is the pacing. I thought the pacing of the game was pretty good all around, with the exception of some of the side content, which was a little bit weird to me. Now, here's the thing. This is not an open world game. I mean, it's weird. Okay, it's not your typical open world game. It's like you have these levels, you go through these levels, and you do these things. It is very linear, but it does have a couple of areas that allow for exploration, and it has a couple of areas that do have like a couple of checklists of things that you can do if you want to. It's all optional, although there are obviously trophies associated with it and whatnot. And there is interesting side content. There are interesting stories to be experienced beyond the main story. Like every little side quest that you do has like its own story, its own reasoning of why it works the way that it works. But what I thought was that there is some side content, particularly with the Realm Tears, that it's like when I got there the first time on some of this content, I was like, whoa, I'm grossly underleveled for this. And so I would go on a story and I would do like one big story chunk. And then I came back and then I'd be like, holy crap, now I'm completely overleveled. I always felt that when it came to side content, I was either grossly underleveled or grossly overleveled. Now that could just be because of the way in which I was playing. Maybe it was because of the difficulty that I was playing in. I was playing and Give Me a Challenge, which was one step above normal. So not even the hardest of difficulties. But I don't know. It always felt a little bit off. And then eventually when I was closer to the ending of the game and I started doing even more side content, I just kind of felt like the rewards themselves were not even all that important. So it's almost like by the time a reward from a side activity was useful for me, I felt like I was too weak to be performing that specific side activity, if that makes sense. But again, that could just be because of the way that I was playing. Now, let's talk a little bit more about combat. I've discussed the combat at length. I've praised it quite a bit. I think the combat is friggin' fantastic. Usually when you have a cinematic video game like this, the combat is usually something that suffers a little bit. But in the case of God of War, I felt like it suffers very little. There is one thing that annoys me a little bit about the combat, one thing, and that is whenever you are fighting crowds of enemies. It feels very hard for you to keep track of where all the enemies are. And in a lot of situations, particularly once you start going into the higher tiers of difficulty, whether that is Give Me a Challenge or Give Me God of War, that's when it really gets completely crazy. Because a lot of times you'll be hit by fireballs that you have no idea where the frack those came from. And even though there's a very good system that kind of indicates where the things are coming from, when you are fighting a big mob of enemies, it's extremely hard to keep track of everything that is going around you. That, to me, is the major downfall of combat. Because whenever you're talking about 1 versus 1 combat, I don't think I've ever felt like I got cheated out of stuff. Like maybe there was an occasion where there was a glitch or something that might have happened that I really don't remember at this point, but pretty much I never really felt like, oh my God, I got cheesed because of this mechanic. No, it's like, no, I didn't notice that there was a red aura in that attack and therefore I got hit and it was my fault. I should have dodged, or I dodged when I should have blocked. You know, that kind of stuff would happen in 1v1 combat. It's like, to me, the combat was fantastic in lesser enemies. The less the enemies, the more solid the combat felt. The more enemies, I kind of start feeling a little bit overrun. However, they did something that I thought was really good for those situations where you have multiple enemies, which is you always have your son Atreus calling out whenever something is not in your line of sight and it is about to attack you, on top of you having like a marker that shows you, but you might be too busy looking all over the place trying to figure out where the next attack is coming from. And you might not notice that little marker that shows up around your character indicating there's an attack coming. So you would hear Atreus saying, left side, incoming fire. And you would actually immediately turn around and block. And you would be able to catch that in time. So they did a really good job with that, because I think that a lot of people will say, oh, the camera is a little bit claustrophobic. I've had a lot of questions when I was live streaming about FOV sliders. And I understand, like, you want your FOV sliders, you want further distance. And that's always been something that I've been a little bit frustrated by. As someone who comes from World of Warcraft, it's like I would always see other people playing World of Warcraft like full maxed out, zoomed out from their characters, to the point where they would actually, at the time that I was playing, they would edit like some configuration files and they would make the camera be able to go even further out than usual. And it almost felt like you were playing a friggin' RTS. And I'm like, at that point, is it even like you're not even playing a video game? You're just watching numbers, you know? And I understand that people are like, oh, we wish the camera was a little bit further back so that we could see more enemies, but that's the point. You're supposed to be able to rely on Atreus's warnings and the markers and all of these other things that they put in place to help you locate each of the enemies, which, again, I struggled with in big crowds. But, you know, there's a thing there, which is this is a game that is supposed to be very much about the in your face. Like, you want to see all the details of what is going on, of when Kratos smashes someone's face. And you really need to have the camera zoomed in for that. And I would not have it any other way. Despite the difficulties that I had with the combat, I personally would not have it any other way, because I know that a lot of people like their FOV sliders and they like, oh, but I can see all of the things. I got the friggin' fisheye going on over here. And to me, it's just like, no. I think that there's an artistic design behind the way that they place the camera in Kratos. And I think that is beautiful from both a cinematic perspective, but also from an animation perspective that really allows me to get in on the action and really soak every bit of what is happening up. And that's just one of those things. Some people are going to like it. Some people are not going to like it. Now, there's another thing that I brought up in a previous video, which was the whole thing where I wanted to be able to make builds for Kratos. So it was kind of like I mentioned that the Horizon Zero Dawn problem, where essentially you can max out every skill tree in the game. So you can max out the skill tree for the axe, for the shield, for Spartan Rage, for Atreus. You can max all of that out by the time you get to the end of the game. As a matter of fact, I think I maxed out most of it well before I got to the end of the game, because I was doing a lot of side content. And initially I thought that was going to be a problem, because I was like, oh, I wish I could do different builds for this and that and the other. And ultimately the builds in God of War don't really come from your skill tree. The builds themselves come from the equipment that you put on Kratos and the level of customization that you have. Like I hear a lot of people constantly saying, oh, it's got some light RPG elements. And I'm like, light? You call that light? The hell do you call heavy RPG elements, damn? Jesus Christ, light? Like, you can have all of these different armors that you can equip, which are going to wildly change your playstyle. And you're like, what do you mean wildly? I mean, essentially, you're going to still be swinging your axe. Yes, but how? How are you swinging your axe? Are you going to focus on melee attacks and combos? Are you going to focus on runic attacks? Are you going to build up some cooldowns so that you can do runic attacks more often? Are you going to build more runic so that you can do, less runic attacks, but when you do them, they deal more damage? Are you going to get procs from runic attacks? Are you going to get procs from regular attacks? You're going to get procs from axe throws? Like, what are you going to be focusing on? And there are multitudes of ways in which you can play. Now, the one that I ended up going with was just spamming runic attacks, because I really enjoyed the animations on the runic attacks. They always felt extremely brutal, and I love that aspect of the game. So I focused a lot on runic attacks and cooldowns, and I ended up working the entirety of my gear around that specific playstyle, to the point where near the end of the game, essentially my opening to a fight would be just like runic attack 1, runic attack 2, runic attack 3, runic attack 4. And usually by then, if everyone was not dead, I would just pick up my axe again and restart all the way from the beginning. That's how I would go, just like straight up 4 runic attacks back to back, and then a couple of running attacks in between to like just throw enemies around for a little bit. It was super satisfying to me, just like spamming runic attacks. But that's not the only way. There are several sets at the end of the game that kind of reinforce even the Spartan Rage playstyle, or the more melee-oriented playstyle where you do less runic attacks, but instead you focus more on dealing more damage with your regular attacks. And I was surprised. I mean, to the point where you can even customize the way that Atreus himself plays. Like, you can have Atreus be more of a ranged fighter, where he will shoot arrows more, with dealing more damage, allowing you to do more aerial combos by throwing enemies in the air, then shooting arrows up at them, and allowing you to deal more damage while enemies are in the air. So you would be able to pick skills that would throw enemies up in the air and then have Atreus fire arrows at them while they're in the air, increasing the damage. That's one of the play styles. The other one is you can have Atreus get you health stones, or you can have Atreus actually go in and do melee attacks, which was actually the style that I went with melee attacks for Atreus. And again, just like the multiple play styles that you would unlock by doing all of these things, I was really surprised because when I saw the skill tree and I noticed that I can see that I'm going to be able to upgrade every single skill in this skill tree to its maximum, I lost a little bit of my my oomph, because I was like, well, everybody's going to be playing the same way. No, they're not. Everybody's not going to be playing the same way. People are going to be playing in wildly different ways, and that really made me a lot happier by the time I was closer to the end of the game to know that the way that I am playing is the way that I am playing, and it is not necessarily the way that everybody else is playing. That to me is the important thing about making builds, is making sure that players have options. And again, I thought that wasn't going to be the case, and I was wrong. There are plenty of options. There are plenty of ways that you can build your character. Hell, I'm still upgrading my character now. And if you guys can believe it, I finished the game. There's still plenty of stuff for you to do after you finish the game. Plenty of side content. And this is me. You guys know me. I see a shiny. I have to go figure out a shiny. I see the puzzle. I have to go figure out the puzzle. Even after finishing the game and me playing like that, doing tons and tons of side content, there's still tons and tons more of side content to do in the game. Now, when it comes to me recommending this game, which I think I've already recommended it, after having finished it, I would only recommend it even more. This is one of those games that I would go, do you have a PlayStation 4? You should play this game. That's pretty much the way it is. There are a couple of games that I will refer to like that. This is definitely one of them. It's kind of like the same thing. Do you have a Nintendo Switch? You should play Breath of the Wild. You have a PlayStation 4? You should definitely play God of War. Okay, that's just the way that I'm going to leave it at. Now, like I said, I do want to talk a little bit about some specific moments in the game. Now, these are going to be moments that actually contain spoilers, so if you guys want to head out of the video now so that in case you haven't finished the game yet or whatever, I'm going to start talking about spoilers at this point, so the symbol that is probably here will be moving here to kind of mark that. And yeah, thank you guys very much for watching the video up until this point. If you guys enjoyed the video, remember, subscribe, hit the notifications, all that stuff. Hit it with a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one. If, however, you guys have already finished the game and you want to hear the rest that I have to talk about, let's get started. This is the end of your spoiler warning. Spoilers are going to be coming in now. So I wanted to talk about the multiple moments in the game that really marked me. Now, there is one specific moment that I'm really going to elaborate on because that, I think, despite the fact that it's very early on in the game, it is definitely something that marked me the most throughout the entirety of the journey. But first, I have to bring up the Baldur fights. Jesus, the Baldur fights are so amazing. So I believe there's 3 of them where you actually fight Baldur, if I remember correctly. So the first one really sets the tone for the game, and there was a really loud train going by just now. The first one really sets the tone for the game because it's when you're like, okay, so usually Kratos fights these big, gigantic creatures, destroys them, and now we have this dude, looks just like Conor McGregor, and he's the one who's going to be beating our ass. As a matter of fact, I think I saw it on 9gag or something. Someone was saying how someone was asking them about God of War, and it was like, dude, I beat Conor McGregor as Triple H. It's just like, yep. That's kind of what it feels like. But yeah, so the fights with Baldur I thought were really amazing. The reveals around Baldur about how Freya was his mother and all of these other things, I think those were also pretty friggin' sweet. And just the way that the whole story enveloped around that, and even the conclusion of the story, I thought was really good. But overall, just the fights themselves, I thought were friggin' fantastic. Just all of the animations and all the things that take place during those fights. Like the first time you're just fighting him outside your home, and at the same time they managed to really craft this epic fight where everyone's fighting like it's, again, like I mentioned the first time, it's like Superman versus Superman, and just like friggin' throwing each other all over the place, and trees are getting shattered, and friggin' big rocks are falling down. And it's just the scale of the fight and the scale of the powers of each of these characters is really, really well done and really cool. So kudos for that. Then the other thing that I want to bring up is the dwarfs. The dwarves in the game, Sindri and Brock, particularly Brock, It was really cool for me throughout the entirety of the game because there's this dwarf that likes elves, right? Sindri. So it was always fun for me to make fun of Sindri while at the same time always having Brock essentially treat me like trash and me loving the crap out of Brock because Brock is your typical dwarf. He's like, yeah, now don't go dying, you son of a bitch. It's like, it's so good. Like every line uttered by Brock is just friggin' amazing. I love that. I love the relationship between Kratos and Brock, and because you're like, well, Brock is a scumbag a little bit in some of the parts, but then when Atreus falls ill, you can see that Brock's like, oh man, I hope everything works out, and I want to help you, and I want to do stuff, and it was cool. It was cool the way that panned out, and it was also really cool how eventually, because, I kept making fun of Sindri because you guys know me, I don't like elves, and this is a dwarf who is fascinated by elves, and he wears this very typically elvish looking armor. And eventually Atreus just rails on him, just completely destroys him, which we will talk about in a couple of minutes. And I actually felt sorry for him. I was like, holy shit. Like Atreus just destroyed this freaking dwarf. Like, holy crap. But yeah, the relationship between the dwarves is something I really liked, and also having gotten to explore the side quests about the Dwarven King who imprisoned the dragons to craft this armor that was going to make him invincible and whatever. I thought that was really cool, and that is still the armor that I'm wearing on my character, by the way. I wear Sindri's version, unfortunately, because as I said earlier in the video, I do a lot of cooldown / runic attack stuff, and Sindri's armor is just flat out the best one for that. So that's what I ended up doing. Now, this next story bit was, to me, one of the most important story bits, and I think it resonated with me as well as it did because I am a father, and I'm not sure how well it's going to resonate on people that aren't parents themselves. But it's like, it's a metaphor almost. At least, in my opinion, this is a metaphor for, I don't know, for parents in general, and particularly parents that happen to work in the gaming industry, because usually you end up having people doing a lot longer hours in this particular industry. We always hear about the developers, the crunch, and all this other thing. But essentially, I'm talking about the moment where Kratos steps into the light of Alfheim. So this is fairly early on. You go to Alfheim to get the light of Alfheim so that Atreus' bow can shoot the blue arrows that unlock a bunch of puzzles that you can then start going on with Atreus. And ultimately, that particular scene was really powerful for me because Kratos steps into the light and he starts having this vision about his wife and his son, and how the conversations that the son had with his wife, and the conversations usually were about how my father doesn't care about me, he deserted us, he doesn't care about us at all, he's gone away. Basically, the feeling that you get is that Atreus feels that Kratos doesn't care for him, Kratos doesn't value him, and basically Kratos just doesn't care about his son. That's the feeling that Atreus has, and Kratos is experiencing this from this vision. And as a father, like, you always wonder what your kids are thinking about you, particularly, in my case, I also work long hours because I do videos for YouTube, and I'm always obsessing over YouTube stuff. And I'm always wondering, like, this what's going to happen? Like, is my kid going to begin to miss me? And then when Atreus pulls Kratos out of the light, Kratos is like, frustrated, like, why'd you pull me out of the light? I was only gone for moments, boy. And then you look around and you just see all the corpses of dark elves that Atreus has been just taken down. There's like hundreds of corpses. Like, they're piled up. Friggin' piles and piles of corpses of dark elves that Atreus killed while Kratos was in the light. And for Kratos, only a couple of moments passed. But for Atreus, it was a long, long time. Like, I don't know exactly how long it was, if it's supposed to be weeks or however long it was. But basically, Atreus was sitting there waiting for Kratos for the longest of times. And for Kratos, only a little bit of time passed. And again, I'm not sure how many people are going to understand that metaphor, but as a parent, it's like your workday it goes like that, like depending on how much you like the stuff that you are doing. Like in my case, I love what I'm doing. So essentially coming in here, recording videos, doing all this stuff, to me, time goes by like that. It's gone, you know? So to me, it's been like maybe 5 minutes since I left the house, almost, even though it's been like more than 4 hours at this point, right? And I'm like, oh, it's 5 minutes ago. To my son, how long was that? See, that's the metaphor. And that's why that particular scene hit me so close to home. Now, again, I'm not sure how much this is going to resonate to other people, but for parents, I think it's very important. Anyway, the other scenes that kind of marked me was the scenes where you go and you get the Blades of Chaos, because naturally, if you've played any of the other God of War games, you know that the Blades of Chaos are a thing. And when they start inferring that, okay, I need to go get a weapon that I have back at my house, I was like, holy shit, it's going to be the Blades of Chaos. Now, personally, I still prefer the axe. Like, I'm sorry, I don't have that much nostalgia for the Blades of Chaos. I played God of War 3 and God of War Ascension. Never really played the other ones, even though I do own them for PlayStation 3. I own all of the God of Wars. I own God of War 1 and 2 remastered for PS3, as well as the Ghost of Sparta, and there's one more that was also remastered from a portable system. I own all of that stuff. Never played them. I only played God of War 3 and God of War Ascension. I love those games. So I guess that the Blades of Chaos, I mean, I don't know. I don't get held up on nostalgia for that. But a big axe, are you kidding me? I still prefer the axe. But having said that, the moment where you go and you see Athena on the boat, and I was like, holy shit, here it comes. And then you go back to the house and you pick up Blades of Chaos. I think that whole scene when you take Atreus back to the witch, and then you go back, and that whole time span where you're just like, you have to sit there and think about what is happening and all that stuff, and you talk, and Mimir talks with you, and then you learn about Athena, and you don't learn about Athena, you see the vision of Athena, and I don't know, that whole scene was really cool, in my opinion. Then one of the things that really marked me is that after you go through this ordeal to go get the blades, and you go through Helheim to get the heart of the dude who's watching the bridge or whatever to cure Atreus, after you go through that, Kratos actually tells Atreus that he's a god, and so is Atreus. So they're both gods. And then Atreus is like, well, I'm a god. I can do whatever the hell I want. And that was a really interesting point in the story, because you're used to things working a certain way from a gameplay standpoint, right? It's like, oh, I press square, Atreus fires arrows. I hold down square, Atreus does the special attack and all of this stuff. And when Atreus goes rogue, so to speak, Atreus just starts like being super arrogant. It's like, I do what I want. I'm deadly. I'm a god. I'm super powerful. I do all of this stuff. I'm amazing. And you start really seeing Atreus go to this dark side. And as Atreus begins to lose control, it is reflected in gameplay. You can no longer control Atreus' attacks because he is firing the arrows by himself. He is using the special pretty much on cooldown. He's using it all the time, so you can't really plan on it. And I thought it was an interesting way to convey that this character is going through a development stage and this is going to affect your gameplay. So, it was a really cool mechanic to just tie in gameplay and storytelling in one go. Again, this might be just a small little detail for some people, but to me, I thought that was amazing. The whole thing of him just like, you can't control Atreus right now. Atreus is just like, he's on his own world. Forget about it. But yeah, that was really cool. I did think that ended a little bit too abruptly. Like, he went from that to just normal a little bit too fast. I thought that there could have been a couple of more in-betweens there where he was still like coming to grips with being a god and actually realizing that he should also have a moral compass. Because when he becomes a god, he's just like, I don't have a moral compass. Fuck it, I'll do what I want. Kill everything. Kill everyone. I don't care. But again, it was a really interesting moment of Atreus being arrogant and just like not giving a crap because he's a god. That to me was really cool. Then we got Mimir's stories, which were moments that I really enjoyed because I thought that these were very well done in terms of when they took place. Because like when you're in the middle of the action, when you're doing exploration that demands you to focus and figure out, okay, I need to figure out this puzzle, I need to figure out this thing. These characters will only talk to you if they have something relevant to what is happening at that time. However, whenever you are traveling, you're just off on the boat, traveling through the Lake of Nine or whatever, story time. And I was like, this is perfect because it fills in the gaps. Like you don't really feel like, oh, I'm bored out of my mind on this fucking boat. No, you're listening to this interesting story that Mimir is telling and the interaction between Mimir and your son. Or even at the start of the game, before Mimir is a thing, it's between Kratos and his son, and Kratos is the one telling the stories. So that was really interesting. Those also took place whenever you used the gates thing, the realm between realms, the blue thing. Whenever you went there, then they would also tell stories there. So I thought that those stories were really well done, and they really helped the pacing of the game. They really help it not feel like, oh, now you're just traveling from here to here and you have to be bored for a little bit. No, there was nothing. There was never any of that. And the other interesting thing is when you were traveling, by the way, they would always like replenish the stuff that would show up in the lake. So whenever you were in the lake, there was always stuff to, deviate yourself a little bit from the whatever critical path you want to take and pick up some Aegir's Gold or some Yggdrasil Dew that would increase your stats and stuff. So that was really cool. Then it's just exploration in general. I thought exploration in general in the game was pretty awesome. Even though the side content, I always had that problem and I always felt like I was either under-leveled or over-leveled. But overall, I greatly enjoyed the moments that I spent exploring the game. And that was also another reason why I was like, I really want to play the game by myself because I don't think it's that interesting in a live stream if I'm just scratching my head, figuring out this side content like, oh, there's this puzzle thing over here, and I still don't know exactly how to work around it. So exploration in general was also very satisfying. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that really surprised me as I was getting to the final beats of the story, was when I realized, wait a second, there's 2 realms here that I haven't even explored at all. And I can, because I've been doing all this side content and I unlocked the ciphers to travel to Muspelheim and Niflheim. And I had never even set foot there. And I was like, wow. So there's these 2 whole levels, which frankly, they're not as important as the other areas from a story perspective. It's more like, oh, this is a big arena thing that you just go in and you fight a bunch of stuff. And this one has procedurally generated, not really procedurally generated, but randomly changing. I don't know. It's a level that keeps changing. It's almost like the Greek labyrinth. I forget the Minotaur labyrinth, whatever. But this labyrinth keeps changing whenever you go in there. And it's kind of like an end game thing where you can grind for resources to upgrade your end game armor and stuff, which does not contribute that much for the story because you don't need maximum armor to beat the final boss. But it was interesting to see that on top of everything they had done in the game, they were still like, hey, and by the way, if you guys enjoy the combat that much, here are these additional challenges. Then there's also the Valkyries that you also have to do that. Haven't completed yet. I think I've killed 4 of the Valkyries at this point. Haven't really killed the Valkyrie Queen. Remember, I'm playing and give me a challenge. It is challenging, okay? And finally, the conclusion of the story, when you figure out that Faye is a giant. And when you figure out that Faye wanted to call Atreus Loki. Now, what the hell could that mean? And then you also see the final cutscene with Thor, and you know that there's going to be another God of War game for sure. But ultimately, the way that this one ended, even if there wasn't another one, like for whatever reason, it's like, well, we're not going to be able to make another one because this didn't work out according to plan or whatever. Like, this still feels fantastic as its own game. And I don't know what else to say. I just kind of wanted to get all of this out there after having actually finished the game. I need to start finishing more games. Like, for those of you that don't know, I've actually didn't finish Persona 5. I love Persona 5, did not finish it yet. Because again, it was one of those games that was left to the wayside because I had to work on other stuff that was more relevant to what I was doing at the time in my channel. And so I figured if a game does not, warrant enough attention for me to do all of these things that I want to do, I still want to at least do like a post-mortem almost like what I did here. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below. Again, remember, if you want to subscribe, receive all the notifications on that stuff, hit subscribe button, click the bell icon, because otherwise hitting subscribe button doesn't really mean anything nowadays. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.